Hey guys, welcome back to Wentworth Life, the channel that talks all things Wentworth. So we are up to Season 9, or Season 8 Part 2, whatever you want to call it, and we're on Episode 4. And it was a fantastic episode yet again. So before I jump into the review, please make sure you've hit that subscribe button, and if you stick around until the end of this video, I will be responding to some of your comments from my previous videos. And just a quick warning that this video is going to contain spoilers, as I'm going to be delving into everything from episode 4. Okay, well, if you've been following my episode reviews over the last couple of weeks, then you will know that this Judy storyline is making me stressed, and that I couldn't wait for the truth about Judy to finally come out, and my wish has finally come true. Put it this way, I was so happy by the end of this episode, I was bloody cheering. But before we talk about that, let's start from the very beginning. So the episode begins with a bit of a montage of Allie's day-to-day life, from the moment she wakes up and the struggles that she's going through each and every day. And I tell you what guys, this opening scene made me feel motivated, because we see the struggles that Allie is going through from the moment she wakes up, and we even see her outside in the yard doing some workouts with some weights to build her upper strength. And I just thought, good on you Allie, and honestly it made me so motivated just watching this scene. It actually made me realise that I need to get my ass back to the gym soon. We also see Allie is having regular counselling with Dr. Miller before it cuts to Allie in the yard, with Bee's blanket over her knees, looking like she's deep in thought and having a bit of a daydream. Boomer is back, but she's still a little bit sore. Now this scene did make me giggle, because Boomer and Allie are watching Lou and her crew play basketball, and Boomer is pretty much thinking out loud, because she goes on to say Lou is a cunt, Mari is a cunt, Mullet is a cunt, and Ferguson is a right cunt. And then she says, all we need now is some more cunts. Now I don't use that word very often, but it had to be mentioned in this video, because just as Boomer says that, in walks Eve Wilder, or otherwise known as Nanny Wilder. And boy do I have some thoughts about Nanny Wilder. So Eve is inducted by Jake, and while he is doing the induction, he recognises Eve. So Eve runs an online blog about parenting tips, and Jake has been following Eve's blog for advice. So Jake seems quite happy to be face to face with Nanny Eve Wilder, and even starts to go off topic for a moment, and he starts to ask her for some advice to help get baby Grace to have a good night's sleep. And Eve is like, have you tried a hot water bottle on her tummy? But then Jake quickly checks what Eve has been arrested for, and she has been charged with a hit and run and leaving the scene of an accident. But Eve insists that it was an accident and she didn't even realise that she had hit a man. And then Jake goes back into officer mode and carries on with the induction. Later on, Jake is showing Vera the online blog that Nanny Wilder runs, and he tells Vera that he's just inducted her into the prison. So a very tired looking Vera is like, so you've been taking parenting tips from a convicted criminal. But Jake replies saying that, you know, she's innocent and he believes her. It was quite funny, because Jake always seems to try his best with Vera, but he always ends up looking silly every single time. Anyway, Nanny Eve Wilder is taken to Reb's old cell, and when Lou Kelly sees Eve sitting in Reb's old cell, Lou completely flips out and screams at Eve to get out of the cell. A very sheepish Eve Wilder comes out and tells Lou that the officer put her in there, and Lou is like, I do not give a fuck. Mari manages to calm down the situation, but Joan has overheard Eve's voice and recognises it straight away. So Joan goes up to Eve and introduces herself as Kath Maxwell, but straight away Eve says, I know you, you're Joan Ferguson. You used to be a guard at Blackmore. And Mari has overheard everything, and she goes on to explain to Eve that Joan has had a serious head injury and no longer remembers anything from her past, and now she goes by the name of Kath Maxwell. Eve seems to accept this for the moment, but as she walks back to her cell, her and Joan watch each other, and Eve has got this creepy smile on her face, as if to say, no way have you lost your memory. And Eve looks like she's gonna have a lot of fun with Joan. Already by this point, point of the episode, I love Eve's character. She's definitely going to be trouble. Her little evil smiles reminds me of Sonia Stevens back in season 4 and season 5 when she used to do the same thing with Liz, which is quite ironic really, because Tina Bursill, who was playing Nanny Wilder, she actually played the original Sonia Stevens in Prisoner Cell Block H. Sticking with Eve and Joan for the moment because I think this storyline is so good but it's so messed up. Eve is brought to the kitchen to do some work, and Kath is asked to show Eve how to fold some tea towels in the correct way. So Eve uses this opportunity to wind up Joan because Eve knows that Joan is faking. I mean, Eve is like, "Oh Joan, could you show me again how to fold the tea towels?" So Joan shows her once again, and then Eve is like, "Simple yet so perfect." And then she goes on to say that you were always one to pay attention to detail. And then she starts to probe Joan by asking, "Is it true that you don't remember anything?" And while Eve is asking these questions, you can see Joan with the knife for a second, like it's really getting to Joan. Eve is really getting on Joan's nerves. Eve then says that she remembers Blackmore as if it was yesterday, not the fondest of memories, and Joan starts to violently chop some carrots. And I always get really nervous when in any TV show, when a camera pans up to a character chopping food on TV shows, especially if they're like having an argument. It just makes me very nervous for someone who's about to lose a finger. Eve then starts to probe Joan even more by telling her that she remembers that the women used to call you the fixer, which of course is true because back in season 2 when Joan arrived at Wentworth as governor, Liz said in a scene that the women at Blackmore used to call Joan the fixer. Eve then says to Joan that ending up as a prisoner must have been such a fall from grace and humiliating. And you can see in Joan's face, she's getting super angry, but is trying her best to, just to try and control it. So Joan tries to change the subject by grabbing the tea towel and showing Eve what to do for a third time. Eve then leaves Joan, and Joan literally just grabs a tomato and completely squeezes it, like completely crushes this tomato. And I bet Joan was imagining that the tomato was Eve's head at that point. Now I'm loving the fact that Eve is bringing out the old Joan Ferguson, but I do think she needs to be seriously careful because she is definitely poking a dangerous spider, as Vera once called her. Joan then goes to Dr. Miller and tells him that she's having urges that she can't contain. And when Greg asks her what has brought this on, Joan says Eve Wilder. Joan goes on to say that Eve was a prisoner at Blackmore while she was working there as an officer, and that Eve fooled everyone back then with all of her lies and stories. But Joan does go on to say that while Eve was at Blackmore, Joan made Eve's life hell, which is very interesting. I did burst out laughing when Joan turned to Dr. Miller and said, "It's taken everything in my being not to want to throttle her." Oh, Joan. Dr. Miller then tells Joan that he is going to give her a coping mantra to try and help with these strong urges, and Vera is listening by the door, but more on Vera later. So later on, during a nighttime scene, Eve is having a cuppa with Mari, and Eve is telling Mari loads of stories about Joan in the Blackmore days, and it's bloody brilliant. She tells Mari that Joan used to wet a towel and then wrap it up into a rope, and then Joan would then sort of like walk up and down the cell corridors while the prisoners would wait and listen to the drips on the floor as Joan walked past each door. And then Joan would choose her victim and go into the cell and hit the prisoners with the wet towel in the ribs, in the back and the legs, but never the face. Eve then says that Joan took a woman's eye out once and that Joan had maybe convinced this woman to do it herself. Now, while Eve is telling Mari all these Ferguson stories, Joan is in her cell and she can hear every single word. And Joan is struggling to contain her urges at this point as Eve is proper winding her up. Joan is pacing like up and down her cell and she's reading her mantra that Dr. Miller has given her, but I don't think it's working. Mari tells Eve that Joan, or Kath, isn't like that anymore. She is a sweetheart. Oh Mari, if only you knew. I really enjoyed this scene. I love listening to what Joan was like as an officer before she became governor at Wentworth. It makes me think that if the writers do ever do a spin-off show, then it would be really cool if they went all the way back to Joan's officer days at Blackmore. I mean, I would literally love it. A little bit later on, we see a wet towel wrapped in a rope dripping on the floor. Now, at first, I was thinking this must be Joan going to Eve's cell to maybe teach her a lesson, but no. It's Eve with the wet towel, and she heads to Joan's cell while Joan is sleeping, and she goes to hit her with it, but Joan grabs the towel as it comes down towards her, and Joan literally just kicks Eve to the other side of the cell, gets the towel and wraps it around Eve's neck and starts to choke her. I was like, yes, this is the real Joan Ferguson that we've been waiting to see for such a long time now. So while Joan has Eve choked, Joan is like, I know who you are, Wilder. I saw your soul at Blackmore. Oof, such a powerful line, I love it. Joan then starts to taunt Eve about the time when she was in Blackmore, talking about Eve being accused of murder of a husband, I think it was, someone that she had an affair with who she used to work for, but I think the guy ended up rejecting her, but Eve says that her conviction was overturned or something, and Joan is like, yeah, after an appeal, I can remember. Joan then talks about Eve's current charge, the hit and run, and Joan demands to know if Eve is really guilty of this one or not. And Eve tries to say that she is innocent, but Joan is having none of it. And she starts to pull on the rope very tightly, and eventually Eve Wilder caves and tells Joan yes, she did hit the guy on purpose. Joan then lets Eve go and goes on to say that she is not a guard anymore, so there's no need for secrets and they can both be who they really are. Joan then flicks the towel at Eve, and Eve starts to laugh in a really creepy, messed up way. This was such a brilliant scene. It was so good to see Joan back to evil. So I think Eve went to attack Joan on purpose. I mean, she would know that Ferguson would probably wake up and overpower her, but I think this was Eve's way of double checking and finding out if Joan was faking or not, just to get confirmation. But then in return, Joan got the truth out of Eve, and now they are both going to be complete psychopaths together. A little psychopath gang. It's so twisted, but it's wonderful at the same time. It's fascinating viewing, I can tell you. I'm so excited to see more messed up scenes with these two. Before I continue with Nanny Wilder, I just want to talk about a scene that had my heart pounding out of my chest. So I mentioned earlier that Vera was looking a bit tired, and this is what happens later on in the episode. So Vera is driving her car with baby Grace, and things start to get a little bit crazy because a very tired looking Vera starts to fall asleep while she's driving. And I was on the edge of my seat, literally. Vera then closes her eyes and drives off the road. I mean, luckily Vera didn't seem to be driving very fast and there was no oncoming traffic, and I think Vera just drove off the road and maybe onto some gravelly grass or something. But it does wake Vera up and she gets out and checks on baby Grace, but baby Grace is fine, thank God. Vera then goes to Jake and asks him for some help by picking up baby Grace from nursery and having her overnight, which I was really happy about. There is no shame in asking for help, and poor Vera has been taking on way too much, and it seems like that all Jake wants to do is be a good dad, so I was really happy that Vera asked him for some help. But I did get the dreaded feeling of doom at the same time, because I do think Jake is going to be killed off in this season, and what better way to mess with our hearts than getting Vera to trust Jake and get close to him again just before the righteous snatch him away. I definitely think this is what's going to happen. Anyway, Jake quickly goes running to Nanny Wilder for some more advice. And as soon as Jake goes to her, he calls her Miss Wilder. Like he seriously has a lot of respect for Eve. Jake explains that he has his little girl tonight and she has colic, and Eve says that you can try onion water as it works a treat. The whole time they are chatting, Joan is in the background watching, and I think Joan has spotted that Jake has a slight fascination with Eve, but then Eve puts her hand onto Jake's hand while she's talking, and this of course does not go unnoticed by Joan. Later on, Eve continues to tell Joan about people that she's killed, and she talks about a guy who rejected her, so Eve stabbed him in the heart and also went on to say that she stabbed this guy 16 times, and I think she said she dumped his body in the river or some sort of water and his body has never been found. But the key thing to this story is rejection. Eve doesn't take rejection from men very well at all, so this got me thinking. Last week, Joan was giving Jake menacing looks, and she even said that sometimes you have to kill the monsters you've created. So I really do think that Joan is going to use the situation with Eve and Jake to her advantage. Joan will try and convince Eve that Jake has the hots for her, and when Eve goes to make a move on Jake, Jake will reject her, or at least I'd like to think that he would reject her, and then this will set Eve off, and Joan will use Eve to get rid of Jake and the monster that she created. Well, that's the plan anyway, in my opinion, but guys, this is Wentworth, and when did anything in Wentworth go to plan? But this is what I think Joan is going to do, especially as in the later scene, Jake thanks Eve for the advice as it did work for him, and Jake puts his hand on Eve's arm saying that she is as fabulous as they all say before walking off, and Joan watches the whole thing, comes over and sits down with Eve and then drops a few seeds by saying that Eve has got a huge fan there, and goes on to say that she's never seen Jake look so smitten. So yes, I definitely think that this is Joan using the situation to try and get rid of Jake, and she is definitely going to try and get Eve to do all the dirty work for her, as Joan needs to keep playing the Kath Maxwell card at least until her trial. It's very clever and I love it, but like I said, I just can't see this plan being as straightforward as Joan thinks, and things are definitely going to go wrong. I mean, just look at what happened with Mari and Sheila ended up killing Reb, not Lou, so what will happen with Eve? Maybe it will be Eve who puts Jake in one of those freezers, who knows, but it's going to be so good. Okay, so moving on to Anne Reynolds now, and my god, Anne went way too far in this episode. Okay, so Anne and Linda, they come out into the yard because Linda is showing Anne the outside benches with the chains that's been installed, and Anne is like, yeah, I love it, and I want another one there, and another one there, like 2 more installed in the yard. And the women throw some mild insults over at Anne, and everyone is laughing, including Judy. But then someone throws a bag of piss, which bursts all over Anne, and I was like, yes, bitch, take that, Anne. The women all start to laugh, and Anne is looking around at who is to blame, and then she sees Judy and points over. It was Bryant. So Linda and a few officers grab Judy and they chain her to the outside bench, and Judy starts going nuts. She's like screaming and she's spitting and she's proper going crazy. And then Judy says to Lou, what are you gonna do about it, top dog? And Lou was like, nothing. Lou then says, you've got some serious anger issues, Judy. And even Rita is watching Judy in the distance as if to say, something isn't quite right with you, is there? All this innocent and helping Allie act, something's not right. So maybe Judy didn't throw the piss. I reckon it was probably Zaina, or probably someone from Zaina's crew. But it was good to see Judy's mask slip for a little bit in this scene, to the point where even Lou turns around and points out Judy's anger in front of everyone. Later on, while Anne is walking through the yard after her shift has finished, she goes up to Judy and demands an apology for throwing the piss. But Judy turns around and says, why don't I apologize for that nasty little lawsuit that I convinced Allie Novak to pursue, telling Anne that it's going to mess up her precious little budget. Judy then basically admits to Anne about attacking her last season, because Judy asks Anne how are her ribs, and Anne's face, my god, she was not happy. In fact, I reckon Anne would have leapt over and smacked Judy in the face if they weren't so much out in the open of the outside of the prison. But instead, Anne instructs Linda to leave Judy on the bench, and Linda is like, how long for? And Anne replies, all night. Anne then walks off, and then Linda, well, to be fair to Linda, she did look a little bit concerned by Anne's decision there. Like, Linda's face was like, oh wow, oh shit. And then Linda leaves the yard with her hand on her head. So I'm thinking that Anne may keep going too far, and Linda is going to start having second thoughts about teaming up with Anne in upcoming episodes. I really hope so anyway, because I really want the old Linda back. Anyway, Judy is left out in the yard and chained to that bench all night. By the next morning, we see Judy more or less passed out on that bench, and it's been raining overnight, and Judy looks like she's in a really bad way, like she's shivering, she's wet, and her lips and her face are very pale. Mr. Jackson then comes on duty and sees Judy, and he goes over and he's like, what the hell has been going on? He then unchains her, puts his jacket on her and carries her back inside. Now, first things first, I love Mr. Jackson. He is such a nice guy. He will look after all of those women if he could. Now, to the matter of Anne Reynolds. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not like Judy. You've all heard me talk about how much I hate the character, and her storyline is making me stressed. However, I do not agree with what Anne did to Judy. In my opinion, if Judy is to be sorted out, then I want the women to sort Judy out, not Anne Reynolds, a crazy bitch who has gone power crazy. I mean, Anne just went way too far with Judy in this episode. In fact, it was literally criminal, and Anne literally deserves to be sacked for what she did. Like I said, I'm not a fan of Judy Bryant, but I want the women to sort Judy out. It's up to the women, not the bloody general manager bitch woman. But this leads me nicely on to the next scene. So Anne arrives back into work the next day, and she has received a text message from someone called David Reynolds. And his message reads, thinking of you today. So at this point, I assume that David Reynolds is Anne's husband, but we do learn later on that David is actually Anne Reynolds' ex-husband, which kind of made a little bit of more sense because we have seen Anne getting frisky on nights out last season. So Mr. Jackson gets into the lift with Anne, and he tells her that what she did to Judy was an abuse of her human rights, and that she's gone way too far, and then tells Anne that he has taken it to the board and now she can take some of her own medicine. And I was like, yes, Will, that's my boy, because it is about time something was done about Anne Reynolds, especially after her latest incident with Judy. Also, I noticed that when Will mentioned to Anne about the Judy incident, it almost looked as if Anne had forgotten that she had sent Judy out for the whole night. It was as if she had something else on her mind, which she did, because in the next scene, Vera finds Anne in the corner of her office crying on the floor. Vera asks Anne what's wrong, and Anne tells Vera that it's 2 years today when Charlotte was killed in that terrorist attack. Now, don't get me wrong, I have sympathy for Anne for losing her daughter in such a horrific way, but that does not excuse what she did. But anyway, Vera goes on to say that she will have a word with Mr. Jackson about the incident, and that Anne shouldn't be too proud to ask for help from time to time. Anyway, Anne ends up leaving for the day, and Vera goes to Will to try and convince him not to go to the board. But Will is having none of it, but Vera tries explaining about what happened with Anne's daughter, but she also points out that even though what Anne did was wrong, neither of them have a horse that's high enough to climb on under the circumstances, which is kind of true. So Will agrees not to go to the board, but he does demand that Anne goes to Judy and apologizes in person. So later on, that's exactly what Anne Reynolds does, and Vera is watching in the distance. So Anne apologizes to Judy in a public place with the other women, and Judy is like, well, luckily for you, I have just had some good news, so I'm in a forgiving mood. Well, today anyway. And then Judy skips off, and you can see the thunder in Anne's face. This war between them is definitely going to continue, but in regards to Anne and Judy, I would rather see the pair of them have a proper fight to sort it out. Anne could easily set it up with Linda, and they could sort out their differences once and for all privately in the boiler room, while Linda keeps watch. I am not a fan of Anne tying or chaining prisoners up and then dishing out punishment. I'm just not into that at all. If we find out later on in this season that it was Judy that actually killed Anne Reynolds' daughter, then of course I'll be well up for Anne taking on Judy, but at the moment Anne just doesn't like her, and like I said, it's just not up to Anne to dish out this punishment. It's gotta be Allie and Lou and all the women that she's pissed off. Okay, so over to Rita and Ruby. So in this episode, these two were mainly trying to tell the truth about what happened when those cops kidnapped Ruby last year, and when Rita shot one of them. So they tell their story to the cops, and they said that they will question Detective Jones. Later on, the cops come back, and of course Detective Jones has denied everything. So Ruby tells the police that she can prove that Rita is telling the truth, and she mentions Eddie's name. Now Eddie is the guy who picked up Ruby for her day release last year, and is also Ruby's boxing coach. So Ruby organizes a visit with Eddie, and she tells him what's happening, that her and Rita are both going to be done for murder if he doesn't help them out. So Eddie agrees to go to the police and tell the truth. But by By the time the police get to him, Eddie is found dead from an apparent drug overdose, and the cops break this news to Rita, and then Rita tells Ruby. Rita tells Ruby that Jonesy must have got to Eddie, and Ruby is like, well, we are totally screwed. But Rita points out that maybe Jonesy is just worried, so the fight isn't over just yet. But this got me thinking that maybe Detective Jones will try and get someone on the inside to try and kill Rita and Ruby, to try and shut them up. Maybe this could be how Ruby is gonna die if Ruby does get killed off this year. Can you imagine how mental Rita would go if this happened? It really wouldn't surprise me if Detective Jones tries to get someone like maybe Lou Kelly to try and kill Rita and Ruby in exchange for an escape. Yes, this could all make sense as to why we've seen Lou climbing a fence in one of the trailers. This storyline's getting interesting. Okay, so back over to Vera for a moment, and Vera learns from Linda that Joan had a weird drugs test result from last week, and that the results have come back inconclusive. So Vera does some investigating of her own, and she asks Dr. Miller if he knows anything about it, but he just lies to Vera's face, shock horror. But something in the back of Vera's mind gets Vera to check out Liz Birdsworth's file from when she was taking the drugs that Dr. Miller gave her, and it was so sad but nice at the same time to see Liz's face on screen. Vera then finds Liz's results and compares it with Joan's results and realizes that Dr. Miller, he has given Joan the same drug that he gave Liz. So Vera goes to his office and does a bit of snooping, and straight away she finds the drugs. Dr. Miller comes in and Vera confronts him, but Dr. Miller manages to talk his way out of it by telling Vera that he's just given it to Joan because he thinks it will help Joan get her memory back. And do you know what? Vera believes him. She puts down the drugs back onto his desk and leaves. Oh, Vera, Vera, Vera. If only you knew that Joan already has her memory back. So Dr. Miller talks his way out of it for the moment, but I tell you what guys, I'm still convinced he's on borrowed time. This also got me thinking, in one of the trailers, I think it was the Channel 5 trailer, we see Vera pouring a load of powder into, I think it's a jug or something. What if Vera flips out and Vera is led to believe that these drugs could give Joan her memory back? Then what if Vera grabs a ton of this medicine, steals a load of it from Dr. Miller's office, puts it in a blender, you know, a food blender thing where you chop food. What if she blends all this and turns it into powder and then pours it into one of Ferguson's things, hoping that if she gives her enough, then she'll get her memory back? How messed up would that be? But if this is Wentworth, guys, this could actually happen. Back over to Allie now, who played a big part in this episode. So back at the beginning of the episode, where we see how Allie lives her life these days, as she starts to brush her teeth, she gets some toothache, so Allie ends up seeing the dentist. Now the dentist guy is chatting with Allie, and then he's like, I'm going to have to drill and fill, which kind of made me giggle with my little childish sense of humour, and he ends up offering Allie some gas. So Allie has the gas and she stares at a photo on the wall in front of her, and it's a photo of a beautiful beach. And then Allie starts to daydream as she gets high on the gas, and she's picturing herself on this beautiful beach, and I tell you what guys, this beach looked like paradise. But for a moment there, I honestly thought we were gonna see Allie have a hallucination with B. Especially when Allie was under the waves of the sea, because it reminded me of the moment from season 4 when Ferguson tried to drown B, but then B found herself swimming in the sea and she spots Debbie on the beach. It reminded me so much of this. But as quickly as Allie is daydreaming, she's back out of it. She tells the dentist that she loves the gas, but then the dentist guy tells her yes, but too much of a good thing is a bad thing. Isn't everything, guys? And then Allie has this look on her face as if she's just had a little bit of a light bulb moment. Anyway, as Allie goes to leave the dentist, the officer makes Allie lift up B's blanket just to make sure she's not stealing anything. Allie then heads to the library to do some research on that gas, nitrous oxides, and she reads that the gas produces a rapid rush of euphoria, but after 6 minutes, permanent brain damage can occur, and then death will occur after 10 minutes. So, what on earth does Allie have planned? Well, later on in a nighttime scene, Allie uses a blunt knife to cut out one of her teeth. Oh god. Yes, you heard that correctly. Allie cuts out a tooth just so she can go and see the dentist again, and guys, it was a gross scene. Me and teeth is a no-no. Ugh. God. So when Allie goes to see the dentist, she has a little accident and she ends up peeing herself, and she starts to cry and asks the dentist for some privacy while she cleans up, and of course he obliges. I actually think this dentist guy might have had a bit of a crush on Allie. Allie grabs one of the nitrous oxide canisters and hides it under B's blanket, and when she goes to leave, the officer doesn't even bother asking to look underneath the blanket because she knows that Allie has just peed herself. Great, clever plan, Allie. I love it. So later on in the nighttime again, Allie uses the gas on herself in bed. Now, when I first saw this, I literally thought Allie was trying to kill herself, and I'm still wondering whether if this was the case to start off with. Anyway, while Allie is high again, she's back on that beautiful beach. But then she starts having flashbacks to when she was stabbed, and she sees Lou Kelly looking down at her, and then Allie jumps up and takes off the gas mask in terror. So I'm still not sure whether if Allie was actually ending her life or not in this scene, and the flashbacks made her snap out of it. Or maybe Allie just wanted to get high again because she did say that she loved the gas. I'm not sure. But either way, I'm glad Allie is still with us. But now Allie has a deadly plan that she is putting together. After seeing that flashback of Lou looking down at her in the showers, Allie wants the revenge. So Lou is in her cell and she's received a letter from Reb's mum, but she hasn't read it yet. Mari comes in to check and see if Lou is okay, and Lou was like, yeah, I'm fine. Mari then tells Lou that she's a little bit worried about what she said last week, wanting to kill everyone, and goes on to say that she was hoping that it was just the grief talking. And Lou tells Mari, yeah, it was just the grief talking. So Mari gets up and leaves Lou alone to read the letter. Now, first things first, I don't believe a word of what Lou has just said. Lou 100% wants revenge on all of the people she mentioned last week and more. But Lou is going to play the long game, and in my opinion, she is going to wait for her moment. For example, we've got Anne Reynolds pissing everyone off and pushing the women too far, and Lou is going to wait for that perfect moment of the women going over the edge before she sets everything off in that prison. Anyway, Lou pulls out the letter and starts to read it. There is a photo image of Reb's gravestone, and it says, "May she rest in peace." And Lou starts to get mad and is like, what the fuck? But then all of a sudden, smash. Allie smashes Lou over the back of the head with the gas canister and knocks Lou out. I was literally gobsmacked when I saw this happen. Me and Peter literally jumped out of our seats because it was so unexpected. The next scene that we cut to, we see Lou strapped to a chair and her hands duct taped. And she has a gas mask on her face that's attached to the nitrous oxide, and Allie is holding it. Lou wakes up and she tries to break free, and then Allie starts to release the gas into Lou. Lou then starts to laugh uncontrollably due to the side effects of the gas, and Allie starts to say that the first hit is sweet and it's really nice for the first couple of minutes. But then after 4 minutes, things start to get weird as your brain cells start to die off, and then after 6 minutes you've got permanent brain damage, and then 10 minutes is cardiac arrest and death. But Allie tells Lou that she doesn't want to kill her, even though she would love to. Instead, Allie says that she would prefer to make Lou a permanent vegetable with brain damage. Things then get really tense, and you can see that Allie really means this. While Lou is laughing, there are close-ups of Lou's eyes, and you can see the look in Lou's eyes, and even though she's laughing, she knows that her eyes are saying something different to what her mouth is saying in this scene. It was very clever. But then Lou tells Allie that she didn't stab her. She wanted to kill her, but she was already stabbed by the time she got there. So Allie is like, well, if you didn't stab me, who did? We then see Lou have a flashback, and as Lou was walking to the showers, she bumps into Judy, who had the towel on her head. So Lou knew all along that it was Judy who attacked Allie, and Lou tells her that it was Judy that attacked her. Allie then turns off the gas and is like, why would Judy? And then Allie goes silent. The penny finally fucking drops for Allie, and I was like, yes. Okay, so this scene was amazing. I love the scene and the chemistry between Lou and Allie, and this was probably the only way Allie was going to be able to get Lou to talk in this way. It was very clever. However, I do have some questions, like how did Allie pick Lou up onto the chair after she knocked her out, and then duct tape her to the chair? Did Allie have help from maybe Ruby or Boomer or even Mari? Also, after this scene, a little bit later on, Lou was in her cell looking at the photo of Reb's gravestone again before setting fire to it. But what happened when Allie released Lou from the chair? I would have thought that Lou may have throttled Allie after what she did to her, or maybe was she too weak at that point after the gas? This is the only scene that gave me a few unanswered questions, but maybe they will be answered next week, who knows, but it was still a fantastic scene. Anyway, the penny has finally dropped for Allie, and this brings me on to the final scene of the episode. Allie is playing cards in her unit with Boomer, Rita and Ruby, and then in skips Judy Bryant. Allie looks up and there's this really tense music playing in the background, and Judy tells them that she has some good news, that her lawyer said that the judge has agreed to adjourn the extradition while they investigate her relationship with Allie. And Judy's looking so smug at this point, and she walks over to Allie and says, "This would never have happened if it wasn't for you. Thank you," in a proper girly voice. She then leans down to give Allie a kiss on the cheek. Oh my god, this was such a great tense moment. Oh my god, so Allie now knows the truth, but Judy doesn't know that Allie knows, not yet anyway. So what will Allie's next move be? Well, we'll just have to wait until next week to find out, but I am so friggin' excited. Before I wrap up the review, I just have to mention Boomer. So Boomer was a bit quiet in this episode, but to be fair to Boomer, she was recovering from being shivved a load of times last week. But Boomer did get a visit from Gavin, and Boomer handed him the memory card from the camera. And she tells him that she recorded some dry humping and some fights, but Gavin wants to see the full lesbian Monty, and he said he's willing to pay extra for it. And Boomer is like, what, in spoof? And Gavin is like, only if it's the full lesbian Monty, as he puts it. So even though Boomer was quiet in this episode, I feel this scene was prominent, because I think next week Boomer is going to work extra hard and she's going to put that camera everywhere, and this could be the moment where the camera catches something. So all in all, another fantastic episode. Gosh, so much happened. I had to rewatch this episode 3 times before I made this video. I'm loving this season so far. So many secrets and so many lies and so many complex storylines. I honestly thought we were going to get some showdowns between Rita and Lou, but instead we've got an already explosive situation on the boil added in with even more tension from this week. Everything's rising, which I didn't think could be any more possible, but it just keeps getting better and better. So I think my favourite part of this episode was Joan becoming Joan again and throttling Eve Wilder with the wet towel. Like I said, it was so good to see evil Joan back kicking some ass. And I think my least favourite moment from the episode is definitely Vera convincing Will not to report Anne. I really wanted Anne to get her just desserts, but then saying that, I bet the writers have a lot more to come from Anne, so it does kind of make sense. I just hope Anne gets a very big grisly ending by the end of the season, but once again, these episodes are so good and so action-packed, it isn't really a lot not to like. Okay, so predictions for next week. Well, Allie is definitely going to confront Judy, and shit is definitely going down. I just hope that when Allie does confront Judy, she doesn't do it by herself, because I think if Judy knows that Allie is the only person who knows the truth, then Judy will just attack her again and finish the job this time. But I think Allie will have a good plan up her sleeve, and Allie will probably tell Lou that it was Judy who stole the money. So Lou may even team up with Allie just for the moment to get some revenge on Judy. There were no fight scenes this week between Rita and Lou, so I will send those predictions over to next week now. These two are definitely going to come to blows soon. I definitely think Anne is going to get worse, but will Linda start to think that Anne is out of control? I really hope so. Joan is definitely going to keep adding fuel to the fire with Eve and Jake, and I'm wondering whether if that Detective Jones, I wonder if he will get someone into the prison to try and take care of Rita and Ruby. Also, Dr. Miller may have managed to keep Vera quiet for now, but I still think his days are numbered. But what a great episode and another great week from Wentworth. It's making me really sad because next week we are up to the halfway mark, which means that Wentworth's final ever episode isn't too far away now. But anyway guys, what did you think of this week's episode? Did you enjoy meeting Eve Wilder? And what do you think Allie's next move will be? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments box below. Okay then, well it's now time for some comment replies. So we have Jack Thorne. This is why I hang out for your review after every episode. I mean, I've watched this episode 3 times in the last week. It was that good. But I like how you pick up things I didn't notice or look into the storyline much deeper, and your predictions are often spot on. Good work, mate. Oh, thank you, Jack. That is such a lovely comment. I'm glad you enjoyed these reviews. I've got to say though, I concord it with what's going to happen with Joan. Joan spoilers are all tight-lipped, so that's the only one I'm stuck on. But anyway, Jack, thank you for your comment. And we have Susie Franklin. Hi Craig and Peter, what do you think about Jake maybe ending up in that freezer? I feel like Michelle had a good point that the sleeve in that still shot looks like a man's shirt sleeve. Maybe it's Jake that ends up in the freezer and that's his arm hanging out of it. Maybe Eve and Joan will collectively do that to him, or maybe Joan will manipulate Eve into doing that to Jake. Glad to hear that you're feeling better, Craig. Take care, you and Peter, and have a great week. Thank you for that amazing comment, Susan. And I am actually thinking that it could be Jake in that freezer, because in one of the trailers or behind the scenes footage, it does look like Eve Wilder smashing Jake over the back of the head with a fire extinguisher, I think it is. But when we see the arm outside the freezer, it's actually that person in the freezer is still alive because their arm comes out of the freezer. So whoever it is, they're not quite dead yet and they're trying to get out of the freezer. But yeah, I do think Jake is very high up on the list. Thank you for your amazing comment, Susan. And we have Alex Brooks. OMG. I was literally screaming and shouting at the screen when Lou was shivving Boomer. Protect Boomer at all costs. Yes, Alex, thank you for that. I definitely agree with you. Protect Boomer at all costs. But the one person who we want protected is probably more likely to die in the final episode. Don't forget guys, they want it to be the biggest and shocking ending ever, so in my opinion, if they want to shock us with a shocking death, for me, if Boomer or Vera die, game over. But thank you for your comment, Alex. And we have Linda. My thoughts are wow. Thank you so much for this scoop. So glad you've been doing better. Also, maybe this has been covered, but I was wondering if we might see Frankie this season. Do you know what, Linda? I would love to see Frankie. Just for like a small appearance. I mean, she made one in season 7 when she visited Liz and Boomer, so I can't see why she couldn't have had one. And maybe Maxine, who knows? I mean, we can always hope anyway, can't we? So, thank you for your comment, Linda. And thank you all for your comments. You're all amazing as usual. Keep those comments and theories coming. Okay guys, well that's all I have for you today. I am going to be making a new predictions video very soon, and I'm going to be talking about certain spoiler photos that I shared on here a few weeks ago in a lot more detail, and you will not want to miss it. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out, okay guys? Well, thank you everyone. Enjoy the rest of your week, stay safe, and I'll see you all again very soon.